So, Kinesphere, the envelope of space that we're actually wired to keep track of. We have actual physical brain structures designed to track these sorts of things. But because most of our perceptual mechanism inside the brain, in terms of its basic neural structure, is self-reflective, we have a large ability to choose what we listen to and what we don't. And this culture teaches us to ignore a lot of that machinery when we decide how we should move or can't move or whatever. The mechanism's there and it works. There's a reason that we know where we are in space. There's a reason that when we hold something in our hand, we know where it ends. There's a reason that we are able to coordinate all of the things we need to just as a biped. However, often in this culture, people don't do a great job of it, and not paying attention to this basic mechanism is why. The basic story of the Kinesphere is be aware that you are moving inside yourself, and that the movement isn't just about what your body does, it's where it begins, it's where it's headed towards, everything. So if I extend my hand toward the phone, what am I reaching towards? I want to feel what I'm reaching towards. I want to feel the screen. Imagine it before I get there. I want to use my larger senses, not just the sense of what's happening inside of my fingers, and weave them together into one big picture of movement, so that I feel the movement as a whole, not just as the muscular components inside my body, but the gesture, where the gesture began, what it's reaching toward, where it started, what supports it. So if I reach toward something and I'm standing, the weight shifts in my feet. What happens? So the movement, there's a movement into the ground. There's a movement with the hand reaching out. There's a movement beyond the hand. There's a movement of attention and intention heading toward where I'm going. And then our ability to respond to movement and to interact with what's around us gets a huge upgrade as well, because we're listening, not figuring out. We can feel what's happening around us, we can receive it, we can pass it on, we can change it and redirect it, as opposed to trying to wait till it gets to us and then catch or get flattened or whatever. We have an innate ability to know. No, I'll say it differently. I can be aware of a point in space around me as much as I can be aware of this pinky. People who've developed this have the ability to respond to what's in their immediate vicinity, whether they can see it or not. And I've seen it plenty of times, and I've done it myself to some degree. It's a switch flip inside, deciding what to listen to. We have capacities that modern science doesn't believe yet, which means it's never tried to measure, which means, well, it doesn't exist, because if we haven't proven it yet, ignoring the fact that if nothing that you haven't proven doesn't exist, then there's nothing to discover. But yet we keep discovering things. Anyway. Let yourself realize that you are immersed. Your body is immersed in you. And that your movement is larger than your body. There's a lot of specific things you can do to help wake this up. But the results are a fundamental change in the quality of movement, and ease and grace and efficiency. We're working with how we're built. And fundamentally, it's not about working out. There's a deep pleasure in feeding the nervous system and feeding our beings in the way that they were designed. Sort of feeling that input. The most basic way of exploring this is through breathing. Because that's the basic pulse. We inhale, we expand our nervous system. It's like a peripheral vision of the body, not just the eyes, expands. Naturally, it doesn't take effort because we're already there. Our awareness is already there, but maybe our emphasis, it's like all of a sudden that sphere has a current in it that's taking our attention outward, and our body follows. And then that current starts turning in, and everywhere we look, it's current goes in and our body follows. Current goes out. Current goes in. So breath is the most basic, but then the body can start to follow, and we begin to recognize the places. We have gestures. We all have the sphere. It's not a perfect sphere. Everybody has a certain tendency, and we accumulate from our history, particularly traumatic history, but anything habitual, or a value system, or whatever. We have maybe directions that we avoid because something dangerous came from that way at one point in time, or it wasn't safe to be taking up a certain amount of space. You'll see this culturally. Certain cultures take up less space than others because of the physical environment of where that culture originated. And some people are much more, able to interact culturally. Some peoples, there's a great story about a bicycle transportation. He was an adamant supporter of bicycle transportation, had some policy position, traveled to China, driving along in a bus through downtown Beijing. Half the street, this wide street, was an uninterrupted stream of bicycles riding back and forth, both directions, just weaving in and out, no lanes, just going. And the bus was on the other half of the road. And the driver put on the turn signal, and he realized, oh my God, he's going to turn through that crowd. There's no break. We're going to be waiting here forever. And the bus turned the wheel and drove right through the stream of bicyclists. And the guy braced himself and flinched. And they parted like a school of fish. He said everybody just moved right around, avoided each other. It wasn't even a thing. It happens all the time, I guess. Imagine what would happen if you did that in New York. if that scenario existed in New York, an uninterrupted stream of bikes, and you pulled a car through. Fundamentally different orientation to your environment. In a Western culture, the primacy of the ego, my space, is not flexible. My space is to be respected. This is what our culture is built around: individualism, individual rights, protecting. These words are powerful. Protecting the individual and their ability to choose and do what they desire, which is fine unless you're in a situation like that and you need to respond to keep yourself safe. And in that culture, it's all about the collective. What is your relationship to others? What is your relationship to your parents? You're about supporting the culture. The individual role is not that important. And look what they can do physically. Something that is unfathomable here. So, this story is very concrete, very real, and very powerful. So our ability to be resilient, to adapt, depends on our comfort level and the depth of our connection with this basic truth of how we function. And everybody's got, some people have a tendency to be up, and some people, their kinesphere is sort of bigger down below. They're very grounded, but, if they can't jump to save their life, So very concrete, specific ways this shows up. There's a trauma that has a certain physical location, boom, that will affect that part of space becomes something to avoid, and we will adjust. Like if you break an arm, you have pain, your whole structure, your whole body will adjust because you don't want to inhabit that space because it hurts. So, threads everywhere. But learning our own biases, learning to experience them, learning to soften them, so that we have a truer sense of what possibility means physically around us at any given moment, what we're capable of, what is around us, and not even how to adjust, but so we can dance with what's present here, physically, energetically. And from that, because so much of the conscious thinking comes from the unconscious, comes a very different perspective on living. Because the mind is being shown, the parts of us that think more is getting this information. Oh, this is coming. I can do something about it. We're giving greater permission for this capacity to function. So very, very useful, important. I look forward to playing with it.